In this clip, we're going to take a look at 5 of the most common shooting modes, preset shooting modes that are found on most digital cameras these days. Starting out with fully automatic mode, and this is usually indicated by a green box or a rectangle on your shooting mode dial. In this mode, the camera is just wanting to get a good picture, and so it selects the ISO, the shutter speed, and the f-stop or aperture values, all to be kind of in the middle range of the camera, so it's that way it can compensate with extremes in light on one end or the other, have moderate depth of field for the image, and relatively low noise. The camera in all of these modes is pre-selecting the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed for you, but in each of the different modes it has a different priority on what it's going to select. In portrait mode, which is usually indicated by the face of a person from the side, the default is to have as wide an aperture as possible. That allows for shallow depth of field, which really makes your subject jump out, especially when you're in close to your subject. Your subject's features will be in focus, and then there will be a nice blur to the background, and that's what the camera is trying to achieve. It's also trying to keep as low an amount of noise as possible in the digital image, which is why the ISO is set at 100. And of course, with the f-stop set at 2.8, the aperture wide open, the camera is going to have to choose a faster shutter speed in order to keep the light balance acceptable. And if you'll notice between the two, even though we have two different settings of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, the images are relatively about the same tone and level of brightness. Moving over to landscape mode, one of the biggest changes you'll see right off the bat is that the aperture is closed down a little bit to f6.3 rather than 2.8 in portrait mode. In landscape mode, the camera wants to achieve a deeper depth of field so that everything from where you're standing to the far background is in focus. Get a nice sharp image. The ISO is also kept low to try to keep that digital noise down, and to compensate, the camera has selected a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second in order to keep that well balanced. And again, getting back quickly to portrait mode, you'll see that there's really not much difference in lighting or tone between portrait and landscape mode. Every camera does have a little bit of an adjustment that it makes for saturation or brightness, the tone, yellows or blues, reds or greens, and you can see subtle differences in all of these images in the different modes. Best way is to just go out and take your camera, put them on every one of those modes, and find out for yourself what kind of tone and style that you like. Okay, then moving over to close-up mode. This isn't as close-up of a picture as what you would do if you're taking pictures of flowers or insects or other creative still life photos. Again, the camera is trying to pick the right elements of ISO, shutter speed, and f-stop. In this case, the ISO is 125, really similar to the other two that we saw, and the aperture is f4. Now in a close-up, again, similar to portrait, you're going to want that depth of field. This setting chose f4 instead of f2.8, so a slightly decreased depth of field, but still really great for when you're trying to get a close-up image in good focus. Now these three that we just reviewed, portrait, landscape, and close-up mode, all had relatively low ISOs to try to keep the digital noise down. When we head over to action mode, there's a totally different priority, and that is to get as fast a shutter speed as possible to be able to stop the action. So 1/500th of a second is selected by the camera to do that. And in order to gain that, the camera has selected an ISO of 400 as compared to 100. Still acceptable, not much digital noise getting in. And you also notice that the camera close that aperture down to about f6.3, which is lower mid-range, but adds enough depth of field so that you'll have more than just one player in focus. Or if the action is a couple people deep, you'll likely have a couple of you'll have that depth of field to cover all of the athletes in that view. And for that reason, the ISO needs to get bumped up in order to tell the camera that there's enough available light to be able to shoot at 500th of a second in f6.3. So there's a quick review of shooting modes. Of course, check your user manual to find the details on how your camera defaults certain settings that it picks, and go out and test and enjoy.